Thank you. Thank you all so much for being here and for being a part of this movement, because so much depends on what we do together. If we don't do it together, it kind of doesn't count. Dean, what's our time frame here, just so I... Okay, all right, great. And we'll try to use, leave much of that just for open, back and forth here. And, you know, I'll just say I've never done an event where I tried to sing and then talk. So one side, the other side of my brain is all fired up right now. Not the talking part. So I'll be feeling, yeah. Well, we could do that. Right. Maybe we'll have a little bit of, I'll say a few words, and then we'll open it up a little bit, and then maybe we'll go back to the music a little bit early. But, you know, I haven't played for about 3 or 4 years, really. Like, that's why I broke a string here during the rehearsal, because my strings have not been changed for about 3 years. And so I blame this entirely on Dean Stevens, because he said, well, we'll back you up. So I thought, oh, then I don't need to really worry about anything. But, you know, once I started trying to pull it back together a little bit, you know, there was no, the floodgates opened, shall we say. And I remembered how much fun it is to play music. So it's going to be hard to shut it off. I'll just say that. Anyhow, I spent a lot of time on charts and figuring out what were the chords that I was playing on these songs anyhow, and getting that done. And not doing my usual speech preparation, so I'm just kind of shooting from the hip here, but, you know, I think all in a good cause. So, you know, the whole point of today, I think, is really, it's in the songs, you know, and it is about how these pieces of the planet and these pieces of society and of our communities are all really of a piece. And, you know, like Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And it's not only that justice is connected, but justice is also connected to peace and war and disparities and the survival of the planet and our oceans and our forests and all the rest. And right now, I think so many of us are in a time of great anguish, because we see it all going down in flames right now. Whether you are a young person struggling with student debt, or you couldn't go to college or technical school in the first place because you couldn't incur that debt, or you know, of being able to afford a place to live, or healthcare. You know, it's staggering how the political establishment speaks to a different world. And we're going to hear a State of the Union address on Tuesday, as we did with Obama. It's going to declare victory. It's going to tell us how wonderful things are. And yeah, I mean, Trump just is totally off the rails, but it's not as though we were getting to a better place under Democrats, and they keep switching. You know, they keep switching off, and each one takes us a little bit further back. You know, I just saw this statistic the other day that, in fact, the deportations under Trump's first year are hundreds of thousands less than what Obama did in his first year. And you know, it gets so much more press, which is wonderful, but it's actually not worse. You know, this nuclear terror that we're living with right now, this sense that things could just go up in flames on the Korean Peninsula, although there's a really happy story going on there right now, which I'll come back to in a minute. But, you know, it's awful what's going on there, and Trump is pouring gasoline on those fires, but it was under Barack Obama that we basically began to renovate, to the tune of over $1 trillion, all of our nuclear weapons and the planes and the missiles and the submarines with which they are delivered, you know. So it's like $1.5 trillion now, the estimates are going up to. We should be spending $1.5 trillion bailing out a new generation of young people, not creating a new generation of nuclear weapons. So Trump really gets under our skin. Because he's such a really disturbed and pathetic human being. And there's a term for this, which I won't bother using because it's in the weeds. But there are psychological terms for people like that who just really know how to bother you, and they become sort of your hour by hour curse that just follows you around. And he sort of has that disease, and he's very good at it. And we'll hear what a great success we've had now. The economy's doing so great, right? Because if you're in the top 10% and you're invested in the stock market and you've got your 401ks, you're doing great, and people are high as a kite if they are in the stock market right now. I saw a statistic the other day, something like that $1 trillion has been earned by the economy in the past year. $1 trillion, which has gone almost entirely to the top 1%. $0 of that has gone to the lower 50%. So, we are just becoming more and more extremely unjust, unequal, criminally unequal, while at the same time we're all watching our basic infrastructure for survival, that is our air, our soil, our food, our schools, higher education, our health is going down the tubes. Especially, them that got keeps getting better, and them that don't keep getting thrown more under the bus. If there's any, saving grace here, it's that people are really waking up. The Democrats want you to wake up and go vote for Democratic candidates. And you may have noticed that the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, is very busy censoring who runs and ensuring, it's just like they did in the presidential race. They have decided the candidates before the primary. We talk about interference in our election. How about what the DNC did in the primaries? I would call that interference. Would you call that interference? Blatant and extreme. We're not talking about some mythology on social media. They say, $100,000 worth of Facebook ads. And they found one. They found one that addressed our campaign. And so, of course, that makes the headlines, that the Russians have been sponsoring my campaign. And I am, as you may know, I am being called by the Senate Intelligence Committee right now, where I get to face off with the likes of, what's his name, Cotton, one of the biggest neocons in the country. In a perverse way, I'm sort of enjoying it. Because their arguments are so absolutely pathetic. So I'm, what should we say? I'm very focused on getting ready for the debate of my life. And we'll see. It's not yet clear whether I'm going to be called to testify. And it will be a mixed bag. It will be not fun, but on the other hand, it will be an incredible opportunity to speak truth to power right there in the den of iniquity. And just so you know, I am swamped with new debt on account of this, because it's not cheap. You can't do this without DC lawyers. I have a whole team of lawyers right now, and they're basically operating on credit. The campaign has to raise all this money. So if you are feeling like you want to fight back or help in the fight back, go to jill2016.com. And we are fundraising right now in order to be able to pay our legal bills so that we don't have to then fight with our lawyers after we get out of the Senate committee. So just throwing in a word about that. But it's not fun. In many ways, this is a throwback to the McCarthyism. Before I launch into that, I just want to connect two of those dots here. The flip side of militarism is McCarthyism, because McCarthyism provides cover for it. McCarthyism, back in, starting at the end of the Second World War, when Henry Wallace was supposed to get the Democratic vice presidential nomination, it was essentially the nomination for president because FDR was in very bad health. It was known that he was going to die during his term, so whoever was going to be nominated for vice president would be carrying on. And Wallace, Henry Wallace, who makes Bernie Sanders look like, like a timid, just very timid. Henry Wallace was just really flat out community, socialist, whatever you want to call it, really a person of the people who didn't stop with halfway measures and who wasn't afraid to call out the war machine and the military machine. And so the nomination was denied to him. Talk about a rigged process. He was about to be nominated, and the mayor of Chicago, I think it was Mayor Daley at the time, declared the convention adjourned because there were too many people and they were violating fire code. So on that basis, they shut down the nomination process, and they came back the next morning and basically rammed in Truman. And what did we get? We got the Cold War. We got the nuclear bomb. We got Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And we got the Truman Doctrine, which was all about overthrowing other governments. It was a doctrine of regime change in the name of fighting communism. And the war machine kind of took over. And part of that war machine was this descent then into McCarthyism, which was the effort to vilify, to criminalize people who were advocating a progressive agenda, so-called communists, but whatever you call it, a very progressive agenda, and people included in that who were advocating for peace. So McCarthyism enabled the establishment to silence political opposition and to silence the peace movement. And this is what goes with the military machine. The military machine goes with censorship, it goes with the repressing of political opposition, and it goes with unbridled war. So, do you know how many countries Iran, we all always hear this talk about Iran as this aggressor in the Middle East that we have to stand up against. How many countries has Iran invaded in the last century? One. Yes, one. How many countries has the United States invaded that we know of? Well, scores. Last count I saw was 53, but, this is like, we have quasi-wars going on all the time. We have undeclared wars. You know how many countries we have special ops in? Special ops who do like the no-knock raids? It's almost 150 countries where we have special ops right now. Back when several soldiers were killed in Africa, in Niger, a couple months back, remember that? And we were like, what? We have troops in Niger? Turns out we have thousands of troops in Africa, no declared wars, but we've got skirmishes going on. And the more we militarize our relationship with the world, the more trouble we get. And the more disasters, human rights disasters, climate disasters, democracy disasters, you name it, we cause. So, this modern paradigm that we assert power by dominating militarily and economically is an utter and complete disaster. Just in the Middle East alone, according to the Brown University's cost of war project, it's somewhere over $5 trillion that we have spent as taxpayers. Every one of us has put in $23,000 that you might have wanted to do something else with. Average taxpayers have contributed $23,000 apiece since 2001 just to the Middle East, the wars in the Middle East, which have accomplished what? Failed states, mass refugee migrations, and worse terrorist threats. You can follow this all the way back to the origins of Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. And this is like, shockingly, what the same strategy that the new administration, like the last administration, is still, trying to push. So the flip side of that is both the austerity here, it's the 44 million young people and not so young people trapped into student debt, because the cost of higher education has absolutely skyrocketed. Wages have completely stagnated at best. But the cost of college has gone up like tenfold, the cost of housing 500%, the cost of healthcare close to that. these numbers are all sort of massaged so that they don't really tell you exactly what's going on. But in fact, if you look behind the numbers and what real poverty is, do you know how poverty is measured right now? It's like shocking how they measure poverty. They take the cost of food and multiply it times 3. That's the poverty level. Whereas, in 1960, the cost of food was a substantial portion of the cost of living. It's not anymore because housing and healthcare and education have absolutely and transportation have all skyrocketed. So this is how they maintain the illusion that we're not in poverty, but in fact, almost half of America is either in poverty or low income and heading for poverty, because the only portion of the community that's doing well right now is the 1%, and to a lesser extent, 5 to 10. But once you get below that, it's got the makings of a very powerful movement. And the words of Alice Walker really guide my every waking hour, really, which is that the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. In fact, we do have it, and when we use it, we can pretty much do what we decide to do, but it means we have to stand up and be really serious about it and organize. And, we have more to talk about than we can possibly get to. But I want to just be sure we touch on a couple of things. So on the McCarthyism thing, I just want to make the point that goes with this war machine. The war machine that now encompasses more than half of our discretionary dollars. It takes up almost half of your income taxes. And the flip side then is that we get silenced by this campaign of censorship, which is nothing really new. I don't know if you were around in 2002. I was able to, we really were able to fight our way, our campaign was able to fight our way into a debate, a televised debate, gubernatorial debate. And in that debate, I sort of gave voice to the same agenda that we share today, that we have a right to healthcare and housing and jobs and education as human rights. That I think at the time we were fighting for bilingual education, we were fighting against the privatization of our schools and standardized testing. We were fighting all the right fights. And have only been vindicated by the course of history and the incredible disaster of this massive privatization, which was being supported by all the other candidates. And inside of that TV studio, those ideas were treated like they were part of some fringe agenda, and nobody even bothered debunking, or trying to debate the idea that we deserve health care as a human right through a Medicare for all system. Wasn't even debated. But when the debate was over and there was no audience and we walked out and the press was waiting, I was mobbed by the press, who told me I had won the debate on the instant online viewer poll. And you can be sure that's why they don't do instant online viewer polls, and that's also why they have never let us into an open debate that's been televised after that. So it tells you that we're winning. We're winning even though it's not there in the numbers. And now, with the new algorithms on social media, they're trying also to silence us on social media. So, really important that we continue to fight that. And I want to just mention that every Wednesday night, we do a so-called fireside chat on our campaign Facebook page, which is, what is it called? What's the... if you Google it, you'll find it. It is at Jill Stein. Yes, it is. Thank you. All right. So it's just Jill Stein, at Jill Stein. So if you go to that Facebook page and tune in, we have a weekly kind of discussion and rallying session, because that's really what it is. It's really about debunking this mythology that we're powerless. We're not powerless. We only become more and more powerful. The Democrats are not fighting back. That's been really obvious. In fact, there was an article in The Intercept last year about how the priority for Chuck Schumer coming into 2017 was going to be a corporate tax cut, a big corporate tax cut. So there's not really a fight going on about that. The Democrats were going to stand up to fight for DACA, and they threw in the towel. So what is it, John, what you were saying before is absolutely right.
There's not two sides in that debate in Washington.
Yes.
Democrats, Republicans have an agenda for deporting people and ruining and destroying families.
Absolutely. And there's there's just a whole series of counter arguments to it, and the American people are already on board. The numbers of people who overwhelmingly support citizenship for DACA students as well as citizenship for people who've been here. The support is there, and it's really about our building a broad-based coalition. And, so I want to just acknowledge, for me, the way I can get up every morning and not feel totally overwhelmed by this is by feeling like I'm a part of a broad-based coalition that really gets it and that is really dedicated and is going to keep fighting this. And for me, that's the Green Rainbow Party, or, broadly, it's the Green Party, because you can pick one issue, but fixing one issue isn't going to do it. You can get health care, but if we still have the military, setting the world up in flames and forcing people, millions and millions of people, to flee. People who come here are largely refugees from war, from climate, from economic exploitation, from colonialism. That's why, we have masses of migrants. They didn't choose to come here. They were really forced to come here. And now, after having been contributing members of society, they're being criminalized and thrown back to the dogs, to the wolves. And in a way, it's another story of what happened, to African Americans who were brought here in chains and then suppressed for generations and centuries, or the indigenous people. Unfortunately, this has been the story of America. And it's a story that can't go on. We really have to change the America that, that controls our foreign policy. And it's by organizing around specific issues, but in a broader context, so that we're taking on the war machine, and we're taking on the healthcare establishment, and we're taking on student debt, and we're taking on the right to jobs and the climate that's going down in flames right now. It really has to be of a piece, but it is really not easy to fight on all those battlefronts at once. Here in Massachusetts, we passed, for those of you whose hair is my color, you may remember, we passed clean elections back in the late 1990s, which created public financing and got big money out of politics. But what happened? We passed it overwhelmingly as people in a referendum. And then our Democratic legislature, our progressive Democratic legislature, in all of its wisdom, repealed that bill on a voice vote in the Democratic Party caucus. In fact, they decided it was over. So it was over, which said to me, we don't fight this one issue at a time. We've got to fight this and create a political party that's fighting for us, not for the predators as usual. There's a lot of, Green Party bashing that's going on now because the establishment is very worried. People have gotten wind of the fact that the Democrats are not standing up and fighting, that the DNC has purged its progressives, that it is supporting its centrist candidates, that it's really same old, same old. What happened to Bernie Sanders has been happening for a century, really, and probably more. My history doesn't go back really much beyond the end of the Second World War. But, it was really clear what happened to Henry Wallace, what happened to Jesse Jackson, what happened to Dennis Kucinich. And now, the myth has started again, and there will be another campaign hoping that you forget and that there's a new generation of people to be misled, to keep them inside the same system. But at the same time, the system is collapsing on us, and people are just not going to take it anymore. Not only because they're being deported and their families are being split, because the jobs aren't there, because the wages are desperately inadequate, cost of healthcare is skyrocketing, education, the mythology is that, things are getting better and the economy is recovering, and it's just BS. It's total BS. And so it's just really important to tune out the corporate mantras that we hear on MSNBC and CNN, for that matter, and forget Rachel Maddow, who is, I hope people understand how much she is really just, a corporate tool in and of herself. The good people on MSNBC all got fired when they mentioned the word war, or when they mentioned the Trans-Pacific Partnership, like Ed Schultz and others. They got fired. But Rachel Maddow keeps her job because she will toe the line and make the CEOs at MSNBC very happy. And with their whole kind of Russia baiting right now, that's xenophobia in and of itself. It's another version of xenophobia. And by creating this hysteria, this hysterical paranoia around Russia, they boost their ratings. So MSNBC is on a roll. It's like what Fox discovered way back in the 1980s. Fox discovered if they bash immigrants, that their ratings will go way up. And so they've continued to ride that train. And that's exactly what MSNBC is doing. They're creating another kind of xenophobia. And they're just high rolling right now. So really important for us to remember that we can fight back. And just as an example, we think all the time that, these problems are so complicated we couldn't possibly solve them. Well, let me just give you one example of what's happening on the Korean Peninsula right now. Because if you listen to Donald Trump and the world leaders and NATO and all that, it's this hopelessly desperate situation which we can only solve by nuking them, and by bringing nuclear weapons and flyovers and rehearsals for, quote, decapitation, which means, taking out the leadership. You're not going to use nukes on the Korean Peninsula without everybody going up in flames. It's just, in fact, you can't have war on the Korean Peninsula at all, because Seoul, a city of, like 20 million people or more, is very close. It's like 30 or 40 miles, something like from the border. And North Korea, because North Korea, has been, what shall we say, warmongered. The Korean War has never ended for North Korea, and North Korea kind of lives underground. We could do a whole session on North Korea if you want, but Korea, South and North, really want to talk to each other. They're in very different places. They've been extremely segregated for decades, but they are family, and they really want to work it out. And they don't know yet how you get from A to Z, but they do know how you get from A to B. And they are starting right now by having a unified team and marching together in the Olympics, and the whole United Nations then instructed the United States to call off our war games, which we couldn't resist. So that's exactly what we need to do. And we can work this out. If we could. Yes. Yes. Yes, exactly. Yes. Yes, it's huge. The fact that they're walking in together without their separate flags. I'm not sure what flag they're marching under, but they are marching in as a unified team, and that's really awesome. And it is such a powerful symbol how the United Nations and, shall we say, the other nations of the world, not necessarily the Security Council nations, not the other powerhouses, but the majority of nations have said, cut it out, you guys, would you please grow up, get with the program, stop competing with each other. Who's got the bigger button? Let's grow up here and let's create a world that we can live in. In the same way that the United Nations said, let's just get rid of all the nuclear weapons. Forget about one country. Let's get rid of them all, which is absolutely what we have to do. And everyday people standing up together. When we have the courage of our convictions, we're absolutely unstoppable, and that's the name of the game. I want to just quickly give 1 minute on another issue that's really critical. While we are locked into this two-party system, this kind of politics of fear, this lesser evilism, because already, you know, the motors are running, telling you that you cannot vote outside of this system of Wall and Wall Street. You got to pick the lesser evil of the two. But remember, most people who voted for Trump were not voting for him. They were actually voting against Hillary Clinton. So, you know, they just trade places. We're not going to move forward under either of them. And almost half of Americans stayed home and said, we don't want to vote for either of them. So if we can just get rid of that blanket of fear, we can actually move forward in a very big way, not just at the presidential level, but like for congressional races or for state legislators and so on. And in fact, we now have 2, not 1, but 2 Green legislators in the state of Maine, where 2 Democrats basically walked out and said, enough of that. So in Maine, they're doing this because they have something called ranked choice voting. Are people familiar with that here? So ranked choice voting means you can rank your choices. You don't have to choose one and just gamble. You can vote knowing that if your first principled choice loses, your vote is automatically reassigned to your second choice. So you never have to worry about an unintended consequence of your vote. And guess who is trying to stop ranked choice voting? It's already the law of the land in the state of Maine. Who's trying to block it? The Democrats and the Republicans in the legislature. Because they don't want you to have freedom of choice when you vote. They want to extort your vote. They want you to have to be confined to one of the parties of Wall Street and war. So that tells you a lot. That speaks volumes that the Democratic Party has refused to stand up. If they're so concerned about spoiling, why don't they solve it? They need it. That's their tool for extorting your vote, which tells you they can't win your vote. The fact that they have to intimidate you into voting for them tells you that they're incapable of actually earning your vote. So I'm really encouraging people to get involved with ranked choice voting, which is, let's see, we have somebody here who's going to, yeah, do you want to just say a real quick word?
Thanks, Dr. Stein. I've been a supporter of you for a long time and been really green actually since I was in college and learned about ranked choice voting through you. And I found, talk about getting serious and organized. Voter Choice Massachusetts is the organization getting ranked choice voting passed statewide in Massachusetts right now. We are following in the footsteps of Maine. Maine got it passed. They were the first state to get it passed, which was huge. We're doing the people's veto. People are very, very motivated. And so I have sign-up sheets here. Our goal is to get as many supporters across the state of Maine as possible. We have about 8,000 supporters right now. We have an incredible group of dedicated, active volunteers. There's another volunteer here that I see today. And so it's very important that everybody sign. This is just email and phone number. This is our strategy for winning. We're very, very serious about this. Massachusetts is poised to be the next state to get ranked choice voting. So if everybody, I have an assistant here, we're going to be passing, if we could just sign up. Then when it comes time for collecting signatures, we know where to find you. So this is a very important part of our strategy.
Great. And the website again?
Voterchoicema.org. And we also are always looking for volunteers as well. So there's if you can check, if you're interested in volunteering, there's a checkbox for that as well. So we'll be passing this around if that's okay.
Great. Yeah, please do. And I really encourage people. It's very critical work. And Matt, I wonder if Matt Andrews would just say a few words, because it's really hard, you know, to struggle with these big things, but we've got local fights going on. Like John here was talking about the work of the Boston May Day Coalition, which we're working with in the Green Rainbow Party as well. So Matt, do you want to just say a few words about what's going on?
Yeah, sure, I can do that. So my name's Matt Andrews. I got really involved with at the last time around, although I've known Jill for a long time, last time around I decided to get really involved. The Boston chapter has actually been meeting here on a monthly basis.
Right here.
I believe
In this room, yeah.
second Monday of the month. And we've been involved with the building coalitions. We've been working with the Boston Mayday Coalition to welcome our new neighbors to the city of Boston to try and build a more united movement. And there's so many. I just want to say that I think there's so many people who talk about what's wrong in the world, what's wrong in society. You hear these intellectuals go around filling large lecture halls, telling us what's wrong. But you start talking about how to fix things, about strategies to actually build people power, and suddenly people get afraid, and it becomes very controversial. So it's such a breath of fresh air to hear Jill talking about solutions. And I think one of those solutions has to be building a party, because these politicians are only afraid of us if we have alternatives, if we have a choice. It's not the only way. Like, we need to be building unions, we need to be building media so that we're not iced out of reaching out to people from the corporate media. But it means really building the lifeblood of any organization has to be coming from the grassroots. We can't have these discussions when it's 2 months, 3 months before the elections. So it's really a round the calendar kind of project to be doing, and we want to run candidates for here in Massachusetts. We're especially looking for statewide candidates so we can regain ballot access, become a major party. People go to register to vote, and you don't even see all your choices on the voter registration cards, because they ice out what they call minor parties. So this is something you can join by registering to vote, and we really want people, if you've been thinking about running for office, we're kind of like that open platform where we talk about people, planet, and peace, and we want people to kind of carry that message in your own way with whatever if you're an immigrant rights activist or you're a peace activist, and you say, hey, this is where I come from, but I see how things are interconnected. Like that's like, we want to be a platform for that, and so I think it's really kind of a unique service that our organization is doing in Massachusetts.
Can you say a quick word about the Justice for Sihan?
Yeah, so there was a rally just the other day, Justice for Sihan. We had about 200 people out in front of the State House. Sihan Baya was an immigrant rights activist. She worked. She was a part of the Occupy Boston in 2011. She lived in Nahat since 1999. She came here from Morocco. She's very kind of culturally. She's very, like, what you would probably consider Western. Like, she's very. She has tattoos. So she feels very like Morocco is a dangerous place for her. So she's raising her son here. She has an 8-year-old son, and she gets picked up by ICE. Now she wasn't like on the run. She wasn't living underground or anything like that. Like, she was going to an appointment at the ICE office, and she thought she was just she was going to trying to apply for asylum. She ends up getting snatched up, and she's thrown in the Bristol County prison, Bristol County jail, where they hold detainees. This is a local prison. This is a prison that our local state tax dollars fund. She had insufficient nutrition. This was back like in November, December, when we had critically cold temperatures. She didn't have adequate clothing or bedding. They weren't providing basic toiletry supplies for her while she was there. They were constantly telling her things that turned out to be lies. And she was having organizing conversations with other detainees there. And a whole committee, the Justice for Sihan, organized to raise her voice and raise her case. They put her on a bus, and they brought her to Virginia, and they put her on a plane. She didn't know what was going on. They told her, you're just being transferred to a different facility. And they actually, when she realized they were going to put her on a plane, and she protested against that. They beat her up. And this whole time she was not allowed to communicate with her son. Her son was put in the custody of DCF, the Department of Children and Families. here, which is a Massachusetts agency that was cooperating with ICE, not allowing her to communicate with her son. So now her son is a citizen. Her son was born here, and we're trying. This campaign is continuing. She had upcoming hearings that she was denied due process. We want to give her her due process, and we want to reunite her with her son. BCF was even threatening to putting her son up for adoption. So she is committed. I mean, emphasize she's committed no crimes. You know, and she was trying to get her asylum here in the United States. So, and this is just this is something that's going to be repeating itself. That has been going on. You know, of course, but it's going to be even worse now that if we let DACA lapse and we let TPS status lapse, this is going to be happening to hundreds of thousands of people. They're splitting up families, and there's a lot that the state of Massachusetts is doing to cooperate with this deportation machine, and we ought to be raising our voices at every level of government to oppose it.
All right, thank you. And it's really cases like that, I think, that give a human face to this empire that we are a part of, that has been so brutalizing the refugees of war. Her situation, I don't know that she was a refugee from war, but she was a human rights advocate. And I think in Morocco, you know, we support a lot of dictatorships around the world. And she was a human rights advocate in a very oppressive and brutal regime, and was here because she was endangered by her human rights advocacy, by fighting that power. And we've been aligned with all the wrong forces, and refugees are really the face of an empire that is unraveling right now. And so this is a place to start, right here with the victims of global empire. And there are many such victims, you know, in the African American community, the mass incarceration, the drug, you know, the war on drugs. Empire is hammering so many communities everywhere that we are, and by aligning with those communities and helping them lift their voices and fight back, that's where we really get to critical mass very quickly. The number of people in student debt alone is enough to win any election. It's basically a plurality of the vote. So whether you have a candidate for a state representative or a mayor or for president, there are enough votes out there among just people who are in student debt that we can be organized on that basis. And so there's really, we have the numbers, we have the agenda, we have the moral high ground. There's everything going for us, and we have no alternative. There is no other way forward because the empire is unraveling, and it doesn't go down, you know, without a major cataclysm. And you know, the economy continues to teeter at the brink. People are feeling it, and the climate is on a clock that is ticking, and there will be no recovery from that. We've just had now the third of the three highest, warmest years ever on record. Last year was the warmest year for the oceans. You know, whether you're looking at the barrier reef or the melting of this so-called permafrost, which releases this methane, which is a far more powerful greenhouse gas. You know, you have to be really to have your eyes closed or to be looking the other way, not to know that. This is it. You know, this is really it. This is time to go all out. And, you know, in a way which is peaceful and which is unified. But this is it, you know. This is the time to forget the lesser evil, because really, the lesser evil, is still evil. And we're not going to survive even with the lesser evil. We really need a very different paradigm that puts people, planet, and peace over profit. It's not so complicated. We need a Green New Deal. We need jobs as a human right for everyone at good living wages and more that will address the climate emergency. We have an economic emergency and we have a climate emergency. We can solve them both in one fell swoop. We need to actually declare the climate emergency. You know, it's like when Japan was bombed in the Second World War, did they think, oh, we'll take 10 years to mobilize this? You know, no, in 6 months the economy was transformed, 6 months, onto a wartime footing, unfortunately, from which it has never returned. But the point is, we can mobilize for an emergency really fast. We could do it in 6 months if we wanted. We can certainly do it by 2030. We could entirely phase out fossil fuels. We could move to a 100% clean energy economy by 2030. We can get there. So forget the lesser evil, fight for the greater good, like our lives depend on it, because they do. We can create an America and a world that works for all of us, that puts people, planet, and peace over profit, and the power to do that is in our hands. I hope we will all keep working together, and let's grow this movement. Thank you so much.